So we've talked a lot about using tonal values and getting the values to go from lightest to darkest, and that's what we're going to be doing today, starting with paying attention to our value scale and how we use our pencils. The H stands for hardness, and the higher the number, the harder the pencil. So 2H is harder than H. If you had a 4H, it would be harder than 2H. Then you get to the B's. B stands for soft, not really sure why. 2B is softer than H, 4B is softer than 2B, and 8B is softer than 4B. Typically speaking, the harder the lead, the lighter the graphite comes out. The softer the lead, the darker you can get your values, and the less of an indentation on the paper the lead's going to make when you actually start drawing something. So one way that you can go about working on your tonal renderings is to simply do a value scale. So you can do this on the worksheet that I'm going to attach here. Start with your 2H and really, really lightly fill in the white square to try to make it as gray as the gray next to it. You notice that that gray is just barely there. So you'll fill in just a little bit of that square and then take a second and go, is that gray lighter or darker? I think it's a little bit lighter, so I'm going to go a little bit darker with it. Ever so slightly. And that looks about right to me. Those match in my eyes. I'll go to the next square and I'll keep on doing that. Go a little bit darker. So I start out with the same kind of darkness. That's still too light, so I'm going to go over it again with a little bit more pressure. I'm getting close. I'm going to go one more time. I think that's about right. This is a little darker than that. I can live with that. Now I'm going to go even darker. At this point you could switch pencils or you could stick with the one that you've got. I'm going to stick with mine and just press a little bit harder until I feel like I've got the right kind of shadow here. So I think these match almost perfectly. I'll go over it one more time to get it a little bit darker. And I'm going to call that a match. Now I'll move on to my H pencil, which actually is a little bit softer. It's able to get a little bit darker easier. So I have to be very gentle with it. And with the lightest touch, I'm already doing the same tone as the one that I did before. So if I want to get a little bit darker, I can press a little harder. And I think I do, because I think these are just about right. There we go. Then I go on to the next one. Push it a little bit harder, but not too hard, because I want to be darker than what I've just done, but I don't want to be so dark that it matches something further down the line. So I color it until I feel like I have the right shade. I think I may have gone too dark, but that's okay for right now. Then I move on to my 2B pencil, and I'm going to do this all the way down the line until I end up with my 8B pencil going as dark as I possibly can. It's not going to be quite black because pencils don't really do that. They get pretty close, but this is as black as I can possibly get. So that's as dark as it's going to get. And you would do the same thing a little bit lighter on this one. Try and match the tone to the left and get a little bit lighter than what you've already drawn. And you do that on until you get through with this entire value scale. Once you've done that, you move on to the sphere here. What I want you to do is the exact same process, starting with your harder lead and the lightest value. Go over here and copy everything that's not white. So I know there's a white area over here. I'm going to copy everything else. So all of the light areas, all of the not quite so light areas, all the really dark areas, they're all going to look exactly the same for right now. They're all going to look like they're very, very light. Now, we know that it's supposed to be darker than that. So I take this pencil, set it aside, and I go to my next hardest pencil, which is my H pencil. Now, this is about the right tone. This is about the right darkness. So I don't want to make that any darker. Instead, I want to go to where it's a little bit darker around here and start darkening things in. Now at this point, you're going to be able to see very distinct boundaries, white and then a little bit darker, then a little bit darker, and you can see this kind of edge that's starting there from where I'm just not coloring in anything else. That's going to go away when we blend, so don't worry about that for right now. I'm coloring everything in just a little bit darker. Now everything's about the same level of darkness on this side of the sphere. But that's not quite dark enough. So I put that pencil to the side and I go a little bit darker with my 2B pencil. At this point, I really only want to focus on this really small portion. And you can see it doesn't go quite to the edge because there's a little bit of light on the edge of the sphere that's reflected light. It's reflected back from the surface onto the object itself. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to color very lightly this area right here. Looks like it's kind of a half moon, crescent moon type shape. It's not going to actually go all the way to the border. Just going to be right there. And I'll color in the cast shadow more. There we go. Now, I want to keep going darker. And I know that there's going to be a little sliver in here that's even darker. With my 4B pencil, it's easy to get that darkest shade. And the cast shadow is going to be the darkest part of the image. So however dark I make the object, I want to make the cast shadow at least that dark. So I'll color that in even more. And then why not, we'll go with the 8B too and do just a little stretch of darkness in there. We'll color that cast shadow in really dark. Okay, so now this looks really rough, and it's good enough as far as shading goes, so you can leave it just that way, or you can start shading it in, or sorry, blending it in. You can do that by literally using your finger if you want. This is not a final piece of art, it's just practice, so blending with your finger works, or you can use a paper stump like we've done before in class. All you want to do there is using the flat side, not the tip, but the flattest side here, you want to move this graphite around so that it breaks up all of your hard edges that you've made with the pencil lines. Go around the contours of the form. So, you know, since you're doing a circle, you kind of want to make circular motions here, and it'll actually make the sphere look more spherical. You want to leave that brightest area white. Make sure you really blend in where that darkest shadow is. Blend in the cast shadow, starts to look pretty good. Starting to look really, really three-dimensional here. That's good. Now, I see that there's still a hard line in here, so I'm going to take my paper stump and put that away and go back to my 4B pencil, and I'm going to try to get a little bit darker around that area so that I can blend that in a little bit better, because I don't like how it was such a hard line. So I put some more pencil on the page, and now I'm going to just blend that in until it becomes nice and smooth. So this is all that we're doing. The sphere is not as complicated as most other shapes, but it is exactly the same kind of process as you would use with something more complex. Now, one of the things that I like to do to check and see if I'm doing the right value is to use this value scale and put it over the image and over what I'm actually wanting to draw to check and see if they're the same values. So I've done one I essentially just cut out. It's the same thing that I would have done here. I did it on my own piece of paper, and I cut out little spaces. I used scissors here and then a little hole punch. And what I can do with that is compare the values. So on the highlight area, it's lighter than my lightest pencil shading. So I know that that's going to stay white. If I move this over a little bit, right about there, it looks like the same kind of shade. If I get to the transitional middle values, we're looking at a little bit darker than that. It looks like about right here, but I'll go a little darker and see if it's the same. That looks a little bit lighter. I'm going to say 4. So this is as dark as I need to shade it in the transitional area. Let's see if I got it that dark. That looks about right. 5 is a little bit too dark. 4 looks about right. So it looks like those are the same values. I could check again in the darkest part of it. So I know it's going to be pretty dark, but I'm not sure how dark. 8 is not quite dark enough. 9 not quite dark enough. So I really do need to go full 10 to get it as dark as it needs to be. Is it all the way to 10? No, it's a little bit too light still. So I would go back in and I would shade that some more until it matches the value that I know I need it to be. And you can use this, the linear value like that, where it's, you know, easier to see what you're actually looking at. Or I've made a circular one as well that's easier for me to hold. So I can do the same thing. I just used a hole punch, one of these guys, to punch out little holes so that I could hold it over whatever I want to check and see what the actual value is supposed to be for that particular part. So this one, again, it looks like it's a 4 in the transitional, and that's good. That's what it's supposed to be. So I feel pretty good about this rendering. Is it perfect? No, but it's a really good practice for getting your shading done. And this transfers over to more complicated shapes. So, for instance, if you were going to do a drawing based on this image, here we go. So you can do that by looking and seeing there's definitely whites there. There's really dark areas. Those are probably actual black. So as you're going through and trying to figure out how light and how dark to make different areas, you can hold your viewfinder over there until you get a match. And it looks like that's going to be our match right there. So when I draw that part of the banana, I want to make sure that I shade it with a 2B pencil. So I wrote 2B on there. That's what I used to do that value. With a 2B pencil, and I want to shade it to match exactly that value. You don't have to be this precise, but this is a useful tool if you're wanting to be more precise. So, one of the things that you can really work on as you're practicing is the simpler shapes. These are the 4 basic shapes that you'll see in essentially every drawing that you do that's more complex than this. And if you can practice shading these basic shapes, it's going to make you a lot more comfortable shading the more complex figures. For instance, if you went in and did some origami rabbits. Now that's really complicated shapes, but you're doing the same things, looking for the light areas to draw the lightest, comparing the shading as you go through to make sure it's the same level of tone, and then transferring that onto your drawing once you get to that point. So at this point, the best thing to do is to work through this worksheet, making your tonal value scale, and make yourself a note of what kind of pencils that you used to make these shadings. This is what I used. You can use softer or harder leads, and that would be just fine. That's an 8. But work through this worksheet with the tonal scale and copying over the sphere. Then do something simpler, like this, where you've already got a grid there. You can copy your grid onto your own paper. It's not exactly 1 by 1, so be careful with that grid. But you've got a grid there. You can copy it onto your own paper and work with that. They're very basic shapes. You can work on getting those basic shapes done. Then move on to something more complicated. Maybe not both of the bunnies, but you know, take one of them out of the picture. Try to just do that one. Do the grid method to get it copied over to your paper, or do the graphite transfer where you color on the back of it, flip it, and then trace over it. And then work on just the shadows. Again, you want to build up from the lightest lights to the darkest darks. Work from your 2H, the light areas, color all those in to begin with. And then if there's an area that's darker, you're going to go over that again with your darker pencils. So that's the process you use for that. And then work on something that's a little more of a finished picture. You don't have to do the whole picture. You can focus in and do just that part, just this part with the orange and some bananas, just the bananas themselves. It's all practice and all of it's good. The important thing is to give yourself as much time working with this as possible so you get really comfortable with it.